political rhetoric's all about choice and empowerment for parents, teachers and children, a rejuvenated educational landscape with increased diversity and better results. Yet in spite of the fact that the 24 free schools which opened in 2011 took up 2.6% of the Department of Education's capital budget, they actually only represent about 0.1% of the schools in the UK, which are all still strapped for cash, and there are loud complaints that this initiative is also at the expense of their pupil base. With suitable buildings hard to come by and finances carefully regulated, the resulting bottleneck means that many schools either can't open yet or have to start in temporary premises. So is Mr Gove losing interest in free schools when it comes to stumping up the cash? And if so, which ones should get the lolly? Zen schools might help everyone to be a bit more relaxed. Then again, skeptic schools might help us get at the truth, even if they are a bit aggressive. Creationist schools. Oh, but hang on, a new condition of funding states that
nothing should be taught as science that doesn't conform to current scientific understanding. Oh, but if you don't teach it as science, that's okay.
But what's this?
How can Mr Gove think of funding Steiner education when a Steiner school has just claimed to the director of a human rights tribunal that Steiner education needs to be able to discriminate against children?
We therefore treat all families equally in seeking to discriminate. Well, maybe you can't tar a whole movement with the behaviour of one school. But in this case, the person in question, who expelled 3 children rather than dealing with the bullying that was taking place in the school, is also a top man in the National Federation and has the full support of all the other Steiner schools in New Zealand. But once they're publicly funded, won't that make them more accountable? Well, not if New Zealand's example is anything to go by, because most Steiner schools there have been state-funded for decades. So this is an example of how powerful they've become. But that's just in New Zealand. What's that got to do with the UK? Well, Michael Gove's already given Steiner schools special dispensation to inspect themselves. How long will it be before they have their own protected path to university, as they now do in New Zealand, called, would you believe it, General Certificate of Steiner Education, GCSEs.
So does Mr Gove think this is the right time to ask British taxpayers to shell out for an education system that feels so special that it even wants to trump human rights?
One of the things people depend on with Steiner education is consistency, and that's because the whole Steiner brand is developed and controlled at world headquarters in Dornach, Switzerland. And in spite of the fact that Alan Swindell of the Steiner Waldorf Schools Fellowship has recently said that it isn't controlled by Dornach, this document from 2009 lays out the basics of Waldorf education and is signed by over 20 countries, including the UK and New Zealand. So is there any actual evidence that Steiner schools or federations bully families? Well, here's some. Pete Karaiskos. But you may say to me, well, he's a Steiner critic, and you know what they're like. The critics are a loose group who have concerns about Steiner education. The main concern is the underlying philosophy of Steiner Waldorf education, which is called Anthroposophy, science of man, and was Rudolf Steiner's own largely intuitive philosophy of spiritual science, featuring root race theory, which states that the Aryan race is basically at the top of the tree. That's a big red light, surely. So Pete Karaiskos is a Steiner critic, but he's also working to take the damage done to his family through due process. But you might say that's nothing to do with the UK because it's in America. Isn't there anything in the UK? Well, only last year an employment judge found that an ex-Steiner teacher had been targeted. Jo Salford had to leave her job over this. That will have an impact on her child as well, and that illustrates some of the pitfalls of becoming, as the judge said, a whistleblower. Maybe that's why there's so much anonymous evidence on the internet, where people tell similar stories of being bullied out of Steiner communities without actually naming the school. Because how many people would want to put up with this sort of thing? You might say mediation isn't a big deal, it happens all the time. But not according to the experts on Anthroposophy. They don't know of any other instance where a Steiner schools had to mediate through human rights. They usually prefer not to attend independent mediation. Given all this named and anonymous evidence, it seems there might be a hidden potential for harm.
However beautiful the package.
So shouldn't Mr Gove ask a few more questions before putting this philosophy of Anthroposophy on the statute books by forming an agreement with it and then expecting taxpayers to fund it? This document from 2009, signed by over 20 countries, states that discipline is dealt with by pedagogical means. Because we didn't just walk away, we got evidence to support our case, including several testimonies from other parents about the way that bullying children in the school were not prevented from targeting girls and non-bullying boys. This is something that the school never denied at the time, but they didn't do anything about it except, in the end, to expel our children. In reality, weren't they just expelling us? Well, whether or not they want to call it expulsion, which they don't, they boasted to the press that they had no problem at all with the children, but with us, the parents, who were advocating for them.
But the problem is that they did expel the children.
Which is why we're mediating, because that is a possible breach of the Human Rights Act under family status discrimination. So we've done it then, we've got the school to mediation, great. Why take it further? Well, there's the small question of having been warned that if we're offered a reasonable amount of money
with a confidentiality clause
and we refuse it, then that might affect whether the Human Rights Tribunal would take the case, which has the power to set precedent to stop schools from behaving like this in the future. With bullying such a big subject in the news every day, I really don't think it's about money. We think this is really about bullying, and it's ironic, as the only reason we've managed to attract the attention of the human rights in the first place was due to our publications. Whistleblowing might suck, but if a school movement using pedagogical methods to deal with discipline doesn't separate bullying children and then uses its special character also as a reason to discriminate against them, how can there be any redress? It'll either be just walk away and your kids will think it was all their fault, or stand up and be a whistleblower and take all the flack they get. So why isn't Michael Gove asking these questions? Exactly what pedagogical methods does Steiner education use in dealing with discipline? Why do Steiner schools need to be able to discriminate against bullied children? And what kind of choice can parents be said to have if they're not given the information? Mr Gove's state-funded Anthroposophy, creating tomorrow's whistleblowers today.